Justin Fields reminds me a little bit of like Santa Claus. You have believers and then you have non-believers. I'll ask you, a believer or a non-believer for Justin Fields?
I mean, I think given the circumstances, I would fall into the non-believer category in a black or white situation, right? Because effectively the Bears are going to be left with this decision, the same decision they had last season, which is, do you continue down the Justin Fields road or do you reverse course and go in a different direction, right? Do you change direction and go with a Caleb Williams or a Drake Maye or whoever it's going to be at the top of that draft? And they elected to go with Justin Fields last year instead of Bryce Young or CJ Stroud or Will Levis or whoever. I think that was the right decision at the time, given what he had shown with zero help around him, right? He was set up to fail last year. And the fact that he didn't clearly fail, that he showed something, that he showed, any signs of positivity, I think was enough to earn a chance to do it again with more help around him and getting DJ Moore as part of the trade to trade back and getting the extra first round pick and all those things. I think that was the right call to go with Fields last time. The fact that we haven't seen anything obviously better, obviously much improved from a year ago would make me say, okay, this time around, he's got more help. The line is better. He's got DJ Moore. He's had more time now. And theoretically, the options are better, the alternatives. Now, maybe they won't be better than CJ Stroud, given what he's shown so far. But at least as prospects coming into the NFL, Caleb Williams and Drake Maye are both better than anybody from last year. So the alternative is more enticing this year. So I think now with effectively the same question reposed in slightly different circumstances, I would say I haven't seen enough to be sure that Justin Fields is the guy. So I'm going to reset the clock and go in a different direction and try again.
Is there a part of his game that makes this an easy decision?
No, I think it's still a difficult decision because he is so talented, right? He's got all of the physical tools and then some. He's a big, strong guy. He's got an incredible arm. We've seen, at least in college, he can be deadly accurate. He can be pinpoint with the football, throwing it. And it turns out he's one of the most dynamic athletes the game has ever seen from the quarterback position. So all those things put together, like the theoretical upside, the ceiling, if you like, of where Justin Fields can get to is insane. Like if you think that he can get anywhere near that, you would be a believer. You would be wanting to discover where that can be and what can we do to surround him with enough help to make that happen. I just think that at this point, he hasn't gotten close enough to that you can be comfortable going in that direction because, again, the constantly shifting circumstances, the financial circumstances are about to change, right? You now, it's a different conversation. You're not just, is he worth continuing with on a relatively cheap sum of money? It's, we have like a $40 million a year number looming on the horizon if you think he's that guy, which just adds, just complicates the entire thing.
Yeah, speaking of complicating it, it's Ryan Poles' brilliant move is what made it so complicated by sitting at number 1 overall pick, although the Carolina Panthers did win over the weekend. So, who knows? It could get a little bit more interesting. But let's say they did have that number 1 overall pick, and they sat where they sat with their own pick at number 5. How different of a conversation would this be? Could this be? Or do you think that the Bears would still be aggressively seeking their next quarterback?
If they only had the top 5 pick.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes it a lot more difficult, right? Because instead of saying, do you want the best quarterback available in this draft, whoever you think that is, now you're saying, it's comparing Justin Fields versus QB3 or QB4 in the draft. That's, I think, a totally different conversation and one that is much easier to fall on the side of Justin Fields on. It's because you have that opportunity, I think, of the top guy, whoever you've decided that is, that makes it much more likely, I think, to switch in the other direction.
You think Caleb Williams is the top guy, and do you think it will be somewhat of an easy decision, whoever has that number 1 overall pick, or do you think Drake Maye will make his way deeper in the conversation as we get closer to the draft?
No, I think it'll be a discussion between the two guys. I think Caleb Williams probably is the number 1 guy for me, but I think there will definitely be teams there that have Drake Maye as their number 1 prospect in the draft. I think the concerns anyone would have had for Caleb Williams all manifested themselves this year, right? Like anything that was on the negative and his cons side of his ledger in the scouting profile, all of that was magnified this season. So that's going to make teams a lot more leery and a lot more concerned about him as a prospect. And meanwhile, Drake Maye, I think, is a bit more of a sort of conventional prospect, and there will be teams that just conservatively lean in that direction anyway. So I think it will be a discussion. I think most people will end up with Caleb Williams as their number one guy, but I definitely think it's close between the two.
What red flags do you think for Caleb Williams on the field? Do you think that some teams may lean towards, more of your traditional size-wise, especially in Drake Maye?
Yeah, it's not size, I think, that's concerning for him. It's just the play style. He plays with that Patrick Mahomes type of game, which is completely outside of structure and trying to make crazy things happen. And the thing that's defined Mahomes as unique has been his absurd strike rate at that stuff, right? Like Mahomes he's doing more of it and it's more spectacular, but Brett Favre did that, right? Like Aaron Rodgers did that. Like it's not stuff necessarily we've never seen before. The frequency and the success rate of it is like Brett Favre. These were critical flaws in Brett Favre's game. He made a lot of those things work, but he also consistently threw the ball to the defense, making these crazy, across the body throws that you're not supposed to do, right? The 2009 NFC Championship game, they lost that game because Brett Favre attempted one of these passes that you're not supposed to attempt. The frequency with which Mahomes makes a real mistake doing that is incredibly low. Right. And that's the thing that really differentiates him from all these other quarterbacks, a lot of whom play with this type of style. For a while, Caleb Williams was doing that. And again, same thing. He wasn't making those mistakes. This year he did. Like this year he went too far over the line, and similar types of plays he was throwing right to defenders. And that, like, I think teams could have convinced themselves that he's just on that Mahomes spectrum. He's able to play this way and not make big mistakes, not make the glaring errors that most quarterbacks do. And, we found another one. This year, I think, is going to make teams, reassess that and go, no, he's just as human as these other guys. And actually, if he plays this way all the time, we're going to have some problems, and we're going to need to, force him into being a more conservative type of quarterback, which I don't think is the easiest thing in the world to do. So I think that's his big weakness that just became a more obvious problem this year.
Could the value of this number one overall pick sway Ryan Poles to potentially, especially, Caleb Williams last year may have garnered even more for that number one overall pick with him coming off the Heisman and whatnot. But do you think the value of this one, how deep the draft class is, could almost force the hand of Ryan Poles to collect as many picks as he can and to try to make the best of Justin Fields moving forward?
I don't think it'll force you into that, but it's definitely a live option because of that. I mean, we saw last year what the haul can be if you want to trade out of that number one spot. Theoretically, the number one spot is more valuable this year because, those quarterbacks are seen as better prospects than Bryce Young or CJ Stroud or Anthony Richardson. So it should be a more valuable pick than it was a year ago. Obviously, the value of it depends how far down the draft you're dropping, right? They dropped from 1 to 9 last year, which is a pretty big drop. If they're only dropping from 1 to 3 or 4 this year, even if the pick is more valuable, you might get less back in return. But it's a live possibility, right? In the options, you've got stick with Justin Fields, you've got draft Caleb Williams or Drake Maye number one overall, or you've got door number 3, which is stick with Fields and, trade down. Either you trade down or you actually use that number one pick on somebody. But that's absolutely an option for Ryan Poles. But I don't think it's such an attractive one that you have to go in that direction. Drafting the number one quarterback in a class, and it turns out he's amazing, is always going to be the biggest needle mover you can do.
No doubt. The value of Justin Fields around the NFL, if Ryan Poles is going to shop him, what do you think it is?
That's a difficult question because I think the things that make it a difficult choice for Chicago are the same for everybody else, right? Like that $40 million a year thing is looming on the horizon. And if you think he's the guy, if you think Fields can be a really elite starter in your offense, you get 1 year to prove it effectively. And then after that, you got to pay him big money to justify that. So I think there's a low number of teams in the NFL that view him as a starter right now, or at least a clear option as a starter. It's like Atlanta, maybe Washington. There's a few teams that are going to be looking at quarterbacks, but I doubt Fields is number one on their list of priorities. And then there's a ton of people, obviously, that would see value in him as a backup, as a guy that's incredibly talented, that can win games. if we're in a pinch and we have to turn to him as a backup option. But, if we're talking about starting Justin Fields, that's the thing that gives him significant value as a trade option. I don't think there's that many teams. So I don't think you're getting a first round pick back for him. I don't even know if you're getting a second round pick back for him. And you're not trading him away for the value you get